The council chamber floated in the void between stars, a massive structure of living crystal that had existed for 12,000 years without a single crack or blemish. Inside, representatives from 43 species sat in their designated sections, arranged by age of civilization. The oldest species occupied the inner rings, closest to the central platform where matters of galactic importance were decided. Today's matter was unusual. A new species requested membership. This happened rarely, perhaps once every few centuries. Most species needed thousands of years of development before they were ready to join the galactic community. But these newcomers, these humans, had achieved faster-than-light travel in less than 500 years of recorded civilization. The speed of their advancement was almost disturbing. High Curator Velkath of the Veth stood at the central platform, his crystalline body refracting the chamber's soft light into rainbow patterns. The Veth were among the 3 eldest species in the galaxy, with a continuous civilization spanning 52,000 years. Their cities had never fallen. Their monuments had never crumbled. They built for eternity, and eternity had rewarded them with stability. "We have reviewed the human application," Velkath began, his voice like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "We have sent our archaeologists to study their homeworld and their colonies. What they found troubles us deeply." A holographic display materialized above the platform, showing images of Earth. The younger species in the outer rings leaned forward with interest. They had heard rumors about the humans, about their strange ships and their aggressive expansion into space. But none had seen detailed scans of their homeworld before. The first image showed a city. Tall buildings of glass and steel reached toward the sky, packed tightly together on an island surrounded by water. "This is New York," Velkath explained. "A major human population center. Population, 8 million. Age of current structures, mostly less than 200 years. The chorus, a hive mind species whose cities had stood for 30,000 years, rustled with confusion. Less than 200 years? Why would structures be so young?" The image changed, showing the same location but from a different time. The buildings were different, shorter, made of different materials. "This is the same location, 150 years earlier," Velkath continued. "Notice the buildings are completely different. The humans destroyed the old city and built a new one on top of it." Murmurs spread through the chamber. The image changed again, showing the location even earlier. Different buildings again, and again, and again. Each time, the structures were completely different, as if each generation of humans had decided to erase what came before. "This pattern repeats across their entire planet," Velkath said, his tone growing more concerned. "In a city called Rome, our archaeologists found 7 distinct layers of civilization, each built directly on top of the previous one. In Mexico, they found pyramid temples buried under modern buildings. In China, entire cities have been demolished and rebuilt multiple times within a single human lifetime." A delegate from the Namori, a species that could phase through solid matter and thus never needed to demolish anything, spoke up. "Perhaps they are simply inefficient builders? Perhaps their structures fail due to poor design." "That was our initial hypothesis," Velkath replied. "But the evidence suggests otherwise. We found multiple instances where humans deliberately destroyed functional structures. Stadiums demolished while still usable. Residential buildings torn down when they could have stood for centuries more. In some cases, they destroy buildings less than 50 years old." The hologram shifted to show human spacecraft. Unlike the elegant permanent designs favored by most galactic species, human ships looked temporary, almost makeshift. They had modular sections that could be detached and replaced. Their space stations were constantly being modified, with new sections added and old sections removed. "Even their spacecraft follow this pattern," Velkath said. They design everything to be temporary, to be replaced, to be destroyed, and rebuilt. This philosophy extends to every aspect of their civilization. They have a saying, out with the old, in with the new. They celebrate the destruction of what came before. An elder from the tall Rick species, whose stone monuments had endured for 40,000 years, stood to speak. What explanation do the humans offer for this behavior? Surely they must understand how wasteful this is, how unstable. Their ambassador is here to address us, Velketh said. Gesturing toward the visitors' platform, Ambassador Sarah Chun walked to the platform with steady steps. She was a small woman by human standards, in her 60s, with gray-streaked hair and dark eyes that had seen much. She wore a simple suit, nothing elaborate, and carried no ceremonial items. Everything about her presence seemed temporary, ready to adapt to whatever came next. "Honorable delegates," she began, her voice clear and strong despite being unaugmented by technology. "I understand your concern. By your standards, humans must seem chaotic, destructive, even dangerous. You've built civilizations that last tens of thousands of years. Your monuments stand eternal. Your cities never fall. We respect that deeply." She paused, looking around the chamber at the assembled species, each so old and stable and permanent. "But Earth taught us something different," she continued. "Our world is not gentle. Every 700 years, on average, a volcano erupts with enough force to darken our skies. Every few centuries, earthquakes level our cities. Tsunamis wash away our coastal settlements. Hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, fires. Our planet has tried to kill us since before we could walk upright." The hologram changed to show images of human disasters. Cities in ruins from earthquakes. Entire neighborhoods buried in volcanic ash. Coastal towns obliterated by massive waves. The city of Lisbon was destroyed by an earthquake in 1755, Chun said. The humans rebuilt it with wider streets and earthquake-resistant designs. San Francisco burned to the ground in 1906. They rebuilt it stronger. Tokyo was leveled by earthquake and fire in 1923. They rebuilt with better materials and emergency systems. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were destroyed by atomic weapons in 1945. The survivors rebuilt them as cities of peace. She walked slowly around the platform as she spoke, making eye contact with different delegates. Every human city has been destroyed at least once in its history. Some, like Rome or Baghdad or Beijing, have fallen and risen a dozen times. We don't build expecting our structures to last forever, because our history has taught us that nothing lasts forever. We build expecting catastrophe, because catastrophe always comes. That is precisely what concerns us, Velketh interrupted. A species that expects destruction, that plans for ruin, that treats permanence as impossible. What happens when that philosophy extends beyond your own world? Will you bring this instability to the galaxy? Chun smiled, but it was a sad smile. The expression of someone who had tried to explain something important many times before. With respect, High Curator, you have it backwards. We don't destroy because we expect ruin. We build again because we refuse to let ruin be final. Every city we rebuild, we make it better than before. Every disaster teaches us new techniques. The earthquake-resistant buildings in Tokyo are marvels of engineering. The flood control systems in the Netherlands are the most sophisticated in our solar system. We learned these things because we had to, because staying the same meant extinction. She gestured to the ancient chamber around them. This structure is beautiful. 12,000 years old, I'm told, without a single crack. But what happens when something does crack it? What happens when the unthinkable occurs? Do you have plans to rebuild? Do you have backup systems? Or have you built something so permanent that you've forgotten how to build it all? The chamber fell silent. It was an uncomfortable question, almost offensive. These species had endured for tens of thousands of years precisely because they built for permanence. Vel, Keth's crystalline body seemed to grow colder, his light dimmer. We appreciate your perspective, Ambassador Chan, but the Council has made its decision. Humanity's application for membership is denied. Your civilization is too young, too unstable, too focused on impermanence. Perhaps in another 1,000 years, when you have learned to build things that last, we will reconsider. Chun nodded slowly, as if she had expected this outcome. I understand. Thank you for your consideration. She bowed slightly and turned to leave Dot. As she walked toward the exit, she paused and looked back one more time. I hope you never learn why we build the way we do. I hope your worlds stay peaceful and your monuments stand forever. But if the universe has other plans, if catastrophe comes to your perfect civilizations, remember that humans know how to build from ashes. We've done it 10,000 times. We'll do it 10,000 more. The doors closed behind her, and the council moved on to other business. None of them noticed the small human phrase etched into the visitor platform where Chun had stood, left behind by some previous human visitor, or perhaps carved there by Chun herself. 2 simple words in English. We'll see. 17 years passed. Humanity continued to expand through space, establishing colonies, building trade relationships with younger species, and generally ignoring the Council's rejection. They didn't seem particularly bothered by it. They built their stations, developed their worlds, and kept moving forward with the same restless energy that had concerned the elder species in the first place. The Veth homeworld of Kelvar continued as it had for 50,000 years. The crystalline city that covered most of the planet's largest continent remained unchanged, its spires singing in harmonic resonance with the planet's magnetic field. 40 billion Veth lived in perfect stability. Their consciousness partially merged with the crystal structures around them. To destroy the city would be to destroy part of themselves. The Veth had never needed evacuation plans. Their world was geologically stable, positioned in a safe region of space, far from any stellar hazards. Their sun was steady and would remain so for another 3 billion years. They had calculated every risk and found them all acceptably small. They had not calculated for the impossible. The object appeared on their sensors without warning. A planetoid roughly half the size of Earth's moon, composed primarily of dark matter, with just enough regular matter to make it detectable once it was already too close. It had been drifting through space for billions of years, invisible to conventional sensors, following a trajectory that would intersect with Kelvar. In 14 months, the Vethastrophysicists ran the calculations 17 times, hoping for error. There was none. Impact was certain. The collision would shatter Kelvar completely, leaving nothing but debris. The crystalline city, 50,000 years of unbroken civilization, would be reduced to dust in seconds. Velkath, now even older and more crystalline than before, stood before the council once more. His light was dim with grief. We have explored every option. The planetoid cannot be diverted. Its mass is too great, and its dark matter composition makes it resistant to conventional methods. We have 14 months. Evacuation? Someone suggested, though the words seemed hollow even as it was spoken. The galaxy's combined transport capacity could evacuate 2 billion Veth before impact, Velkath reported. We number 40 billion, and even if we could transport everyone, we cannot transport the city. Our consciousness is partially merged with the crystal structures. To leave is to abandon part of ourselves. To leave is to let 50,000 years of continuous civilization die. The chamber filled with the sound of distressed harmonics from the Veth delegates, a chorus of grief that resonated through the crystal walls. Other species offered condolences, suggestions, mathematical models that all came to the same conclusion. The Veth civilization would end in 14 months. The Council authorized every available transport ship to assist with evacuation. It was all they could do. They would save 2 billion and mourn the rest. 10 months passed in grim preparation. The Veth began the impossible task of choosing who would live and who would die. They developed lotteries, selection criteria, age-based priorities. Every decision felt like murder. The death hymns began, the traditional Veth, songs sung when accepting the inevitable. Then a human fleet arrived. They came out of slip space in waves. 3,000 ships that had not been invited and were not expected. The lead ship was massive, more construction vessel than anything else, bristling with fabrication equipment and what looked like mining gear. The fleet commander transmitted a simple message to Kelvar. "We heard you needed builders." Admiral Maya Shun stepped onto the bridge of her flagship and opened a channel to the Veth Council. She was younger than her mother Sarah had been, but she had the same steady eyes. "I, Curator Velkath. This is Admiral Chun of the Human Expeditionary Corps. We're here to help move your city." There was a long silence. Then Velkath's response came, confused and desperate in equal measure. "Admiral Chun, we appreciate the gesture, but moving a city is impossible. The structures are integrated with the planet. The mass involved is beyond calculation. We have accepted our fate. With respect, High Curator, humans don't accept fate. We fight it." Maya's voice was calm, almost cheerful. "My mother told me about your chamber, about your monuments that never crack. Beautiful work. But everything can be moved if you know how. We've been demolishing and rebuilding cities for 10,000 years. We're pretty good at it by now. You want to demolish our city?" Velkath's voice carried a note of horror. "We want to disassemble it, catalog every piece, and help you rebuild it somewhere safer," Maya corrected. "We brought 3,000 ships and 90,000 engineers. We've got 4 months to work with. It'll be tight, but humans work well under deadlines." The council convened an emergency session. The idea was insane. The Veth city wasn't just buildings. It was a living network of crystal structures that had grown together over millennia. To take it apart would require understanding harmonics, resonance patterns, crystal growth matrices. It would require precision beyond anything attempted before, but the alternative was total extinction. They agreed to let the humans try. What happened next would be studied by Zen architects for centuries. The human fleet descended on Kelvar like a swarm of determined insects. They didn't approach the city with reverence or fear. They approached it like a problem to be solved, a project to be completed, a building to be carefully, methodically taken apart. The first week was all scanning. Humans swarmed over every spire with handheld sensors, mapping the crystal structures down to the molecular level. They brought in Veth engineers and architects, asking endless questions about harmonics, about how the crystals grew, about which structures were load-bearing and which were decorative. They took notes constantly, recording everything. The Veth watched in amazement as humans treated their eternal city as something temporary. The humans numbered each spire, photographed every angle, recorded every harmonic frequency. They created three-dimensional maps so detailed that every crystal face was documented. Then the disassembly began. Human engineers worked in teams of 6, each team assigned to a specific structure. They didn't smash or break. They used special cutting tools that could separate crystal along natural fracture lines without disrupting the harmonic patterns. Each piece that was removed was wrapped in protective material, labeled with a complex coding system, and transported to cargo ships in orbit. "It's like a puzzle," one human engineer explained to a confused Veth observer. "We're taking it apart piece by piece, but we're keeping track of how it all fits together. When we rebuild, every piece will go back exactly where it belongs." The pace was brutal. Humans worked in 20-hour shifts with only 4 hours of sleep. They ate while working, grabbing nutrient bars and caffeine drinks without stopping their tasks. When they were too exhausted to continue, fresh teams rotated in. The work never stopped, not for a single minute. The Veth had never seen such relentless effort. Their civilization valued contemplation, patience, the slow growth of crystal over centuries. These humans attacked the problem with manic energy, as if standing still meant death. Which, in this case, it did. Problems arose constantly. A spire's harmonic pattern was too complex to safely cut. A structure's integration with bedrock was deeper than expected. Crystal matrices that had grown together over thousands of years refused to separate cleanly. Each time, the humans adapted. They brought in new tools, developed new techniques, consulted with Veth experts, and found solutions. One human technique particularly amazed the Veth observers. When faced with a crystal structure too complex to safely disassemble, the humans would grow a protective matrix around it, essentially encasing the entire structure in a stable foam that preserved its harmonic integrity. Then they would cut around the entire thing, removing it as a single unit. It was crude compared to Veth methods, but it worked. We learned this in San Francisco, a human engineer explained. After the 1989 earthquake, we had to move some buildings that were too historically important to demolish. Same principle. Protect what you can't disassemble and move the whole thing. The calendar counted down. 3 months left. 2 months. 1 month. The human ships in orbit were filling with carefully packed crystal structures. The Veth city was being reduced section by section, with the most critical structures prioritized first. The central spires, the oldest growth matrices, the monuments that defined Veth identity, all carefully wrapped and stored. With 6 weeks remaining, a new problem emerged. The planet's magnetic field was beginning to fluctuate, destabilized by the approaching planetoid's dark matter mass. This was affecting the crystal structures, causing some to crack under stress. The timeline was collapsing faster than expected. Admiral Chun made a command decision. We shift priorities. Forget the outlying structures. Focus everything on the historical center. We save the heart of the city, the pieces that matter most to Veth identity. The rest we document thoroughly, and they can rebuild from those plans later. It was triage, the same principle human doctors had used for centuries on battlefields and in disaster zones. Save what can be saved. Don't waste time on what's already lost. Keep moving forward. The Veth mourned the outer structures, even as they watched humans racing to save the core. Teams of humans ran between spires, working with desperate speed. Some collapsed from exhaustion and were carried to medical bays, replaced immediately by fresh workers. 3 humans died in accidents when crystal structures collapsed unexpectedly. The fleet held a 5-minute memorial service and continued working. Why do you push yourself so hard? A Veth observer asked a human engineer who had been working for 19 hours straight. This isn't your city. These aren't your people. These aren't your people. The engineer, a woman named Torres with grease-stained hands and exhausted eyes, looked at the Veth with confusion. Because it needs to be done. Because you can't do it alone. Because if we don't, 50,000 years of beauty disappears forever. She paused, taking a long drink of water. My grandmother's house was destroyed in a hurricane when I was young. Our neighbors showed up the next day and helped us rebuild. We didn't ask them to. They just came. That's what you do when someone's home is threatened. With 2 weeks remaining, the last of the critical structures were secured. The transport ships were packed beyond their rated capacity with carefully labeled crystal pieces. Millions of smaller fragments had been documented and reluctantly abandoned. The humans had built enormous catalogs with precise specifications so the Veth could regrow those structures from seed crystals later, Admiral Chum stood on Kelvar's surface one last time, looking at the skeleton of what had been the galaxy's most beautiful city. Foundations remained, and scattered smaller structures, but the great spires were gone, safely stored in human cargo holds. She activated her communicator. All teams, final evacuation. We've got 36 hours until impact. Everyone to the ships. Now. The human fleet lifted off in stages, each ship packed with Veth refugees or crystal cargo, or both. The Veth, who had been watching the humans work, boarded the transports in a daze, unable to fully process what they had witnessed. Their eternal city had been reduced to labeled containers in just over 3 months. It should have been traumatic, but somehow the humans had made it feel like hope instead of loss. The last ship cleared Kelvar's atmosphere with 18 hours to spare. Admiral Chun watched from her flagship as the planetoid drew closer, an invisible death that sensors could barely detect. Around her, exhausted human crews were already asleep at their stations, too tired to even make it to their quarters. The impact came exactly on schedule. For a brief moment, sensors detected the collision as the dark matter planetoid struck Kelvar. The planet didn't explode dramatically. It simply came apart, breaking into pieces that would spend millions of years drifting through space. 50,000 years of continuous Veth civilization ended in seconds. But in orbit around Kelvar's largest moon, something else was happening. Human construction ships were already positioning themselves in a grid pattern. Admiral Chun opened a channel to the Veth refugees. High Curator Velkath, we've got all the pieces of your city cataloged and ready. We've been scanning Kelvar too, and the southern continent has excellent crystal growth conditions. The humans back home sent us some new architectural designs that incorporate seismic stabilization, modular sections, and redundant structures. We figured while we're rebuilding, we might as well make some improvements. If you approve, we can start construction next week. Velkath's response was slow in coming. When it arrived, his voice carried harmonics that the translation software couldn't fully capture, emotions that didn't have names in human languages. You saved us. You moved our city. And now you want to help us rebuild it? Maya Shun smiled. Aye, Curator, that's what humans do. We build. We rebuild. We build again. We've been doing it since before we had cities. It's kind of our thing. Besides, my mom always regretted not getting to see your city before she died. I figure I'll help you build one she would have loved. The reconstruction of the Veth city took 3 years. It would become the most studied architectural project in galactic history, analyzed by engineers from hundreds of species who wanted to understand how humans had accomplished the impossible. Kelvar, too, had never been considered for habitation before. It was smaller than the original Veth homeworld, with a thinner atmosphere and less stable geology. But the humans looked at it and saw potential. They saw a moon that could be improved, modified, made safer than the original planet had ever been. The first 6 months were spent on infrastructure. Human engineers didn't just start rebuilding the city. They prepared the ground beneath it. They installed deep foundation systems that could absorb seismic shocks. They created a network of underground channels that would redirect groundwater and prevent subsidence. They built emergency access tunnels and redundant power systems. You're building beneath the city, Velkath observed as he watched human boring machines dig kilometers of tunnels through bedrock. The original city had no such structures. The original city didn't need them for 50,000 years. A human engineer named Rodriguez replied. He was covered in rock dust, having just emerged from one of the tunnels. But it only takes one earthquake, one shift in the planet's core, one unexpected event, and the whole thing comes down. We're building for the next 50,000 years, but we're also building for the possibility that something goes wrong. This philosophy extended to every aspect of the reconstruction. When the Veth crystal structures were reassembled, humans insisted on modifications. Each major spire was built on a platform that could flex slightly during seismic events. Connections between structures included deliberate weak points that would break cleanly rather than causing cascading failures. The humans called it sacrificial architecture. The idea that some parts of a building should be designed to fail in a controlled way to protect the more important parts. The Veth found this concept almost offensive at first. Designing something to break? Building in points of weakness? It went against everything their civilization valued. But the human engineers were patient, explaining the principle using examples from Earth's history. After the Kobe earthquake in 1995, Japanese engineers developed similar systems, Rodriguez explained, showing holographic diagrams to a group of Veth architects. Tall buildings on shock-absorbing foundations. Bridges with joints that could move. The idea is that rigid things break, but flexible things survive. Your crystal is beautiful and strong, but it's also brittle. We're not making it weaker. We're giving it room to move. Slowly, the Veth began to understand. They started contributing their own ideas, finding ways to incorporate flexibility into crystal growth patterns. A new hybrid architecture emerged, combining Veth aesthetic beauty with human adaptive design. The result was stunning. Spires that sang with the same harmonic resonance as before, but now built on systems that could survive disasters the original city never could have. The work was exhausting. Human construction crews rotated through 3-month shifts, then returned home to rest before coming back. But word had spread through human space about what was happening on Kelvar 2. Volunteers started arriving, engineers and architects who wanted to be part of the project. Some came with specific skills. Others came simply to help with manual labor. A human colony ship diverted its course to stop at Kelvar 2 for 6 months, and 300 colonists volunteered their time to the construction effort. The Veth watched all of this with growing amazement. These humans gained nothing from this effort. The Veth couldn't pay them, could barely feed them, had nothing to offer except gratitude. Yet the humans kept coming, kept working, kept building. Why? Velketh asked Admiral Chung during one of her inspection tours. Why do your people sacrifice so much for ours? Maya Shun was quiet for a moment, watching a team of humans and Veth working together to position a massive crystal spire. The humans operated the lifting equipment while Veth engineers monitored the harmonic frequencies, ensuring the crystal was placed with perfect resonance. My mother used to tell me a story, Maya finally said. After World War II on Earth, there was a plan called the Marshall Plan. Countries that had been enemies just years before helped rebuild each other. The United States helped rebuild Japan and Germany. Former enemies became allies because they helped each other build from ruins. She turned to look at Velketh directly. Humans learned something important from our history. When you help someone rebuild, you don't just rebuild their structures. You rebuild trust. You build friendship. You build a future together. 17 years ago, you told us we were too unstable to join the galactic community. You weren't wrong to worry. But now we're showing you what that instability means. It means we know how to survive disaster. And it means we help others survive it too. The reconstruction continued. The central spires were completed first, recreating the heart of the original city with additions the humans insisted on: backup power systems, emergency shelters, medical facilities positioned throughout the city instead of just in one central location. The Veth began moving back into their reconstructed city, still living on transport ships but spending their days in the growing crystal structures. Something unexpected happened as the city grew. Young Veth, who had been children during the evacuation, started suggesting their own modifications. Having watched humans work for 3 years, having learned human engineering principles, They saw possibilities their elders never had. They suggested creating modular sections that could be expanded or reconfigured. They designed crystal growth patterns that could be easily repaired if damaged. They were thinking like humans thought, planning for a future that might require changes. The elder Veth were disturbed by this at first. Their youth were abandoning the traditional belief in permanence. But as the city took shape, they began to see the wisdom in it. The new city was more beautiful than the old one had been, precisely because it acknowledged the possibility of change. News of the reconstruction spread across the galaxy. Other species sent observers to watch the humans work. The chorus, whose hive cities had stood unchanged for 30,000 years, sent a delegation to study human disaster preparedness techniques. The Namari, who had never needed to think about structural stability because they could phase through matter, began consulting with human engineers about protecting their dimensional anchors. Species that had spent eons building for eternity started asking uncomfortable questions. What if disaster struck their worlds? What if the unthinkable happened? Did they have plans? Did they have the knowledge to rebuild? Or had their pursuit of permanence left them vulnerable to any significant change? The Galactic Council convened a special session to discuss these questions. For the first time in the Council's history, the topic wasn't about expansion or trade or conflict resolution. It was about survival, about adaptation, about what happens when civilizations that have never fallen suddenly realize they could. Hi. Curator Velketh stood before the council once more, but this time he was not announcing disaster. He was announcing revelation. 3 years ago, our world ended, he began, his crystalline voice carrying clearly through the chamber. 50,000 years of continuous civilization came to an end. We accepted our fate. We sang our death hymns. We prepared to become extinct. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle. Every species in the chamber knew the Veth had been saved, but few knew the details. Humanity saved us, not because we asked them to, not because they owed us anything. They saved us because they knew how, because their history of destruction taught them how to preserve things, because they build expecting catastrophe and therefore know how to survive it. The holographic display activated, showing images of the reconstruction. The new Veth city gleamed in the light of Kelvar A's sun, beautiful and strong and filled with systems designed to survive what the original city could not have. They taught us something we had forgotten in 50,000 years of peace. Velketh continued. Permanence is not the same as survival. We built our city to last forever, and when forever ended, we had no idea what to do. We had forgotten how to adapt because we had never needed to. The humans have never forgotten because their world never let them forget. He turned to address the council directly. We denied humanity membership because we feared their instability. We saw their pattern of destruction and rebuilding as a weakness. We were wrong. It is their greatest strength. And more than that, it is a strength they are willing to share. The chamber erupted in discussion. The elder species, those who had sat in the inner rings for thousands of years, looked uncomfortable. The younger species in the outer rings looked interested, even excited. A voice cut through the noise. It was ancient, crystalline, speaking for the first time in 300 years. The eldest of the council, a being so old it had witnessed the formation of the council itself, activated its communication systems. Bring in the human ambassador, it commanded. Admiral Maya Chun entered the chamber. She wore her military uniform, crisp and formal, but she walked with the easy confidence of someone who had spent 3 years covered in construction dust and crystal fragments. She took the visitor's platform and waited. 17 years ago, we rejected your species, the ancient voice said. We told you that you were too young, too unstable. We implied that you should learn to build things that last before returning. Yet you returned anyway, not to petition us again, but to save one of our eldest civilizations. Why? Maya smiled. Because you needed help, and we could provide it. Simple as that. Nothing is that simple. Actually, it is, Maya replied. Humans have a saying, when someone's house is on fire, you don't ask if they've been nice to you before grabbing a bucket. The Veth's house was on fire. We had buckets. Everything else is just politics. The ancient being was silent for a long moment. Then, your species builds expecting catastrophe. Does this not become a self-fulfilling prophecy? Does expecting disaster not invite it? Maya had clearly been expecting this question. Her mother had faced a similar accusation 17 years earlier. With respect, Elder, disaster doesn't need an invitation. It comes whether you're ready or not. The universe tends toward entropy. Stars die. Planets drift. Asteroids collide. Species go extinct. These things happen regardless of our philosophy. She looked around the chamber, making eye contact with delegates from dozens of species. The question isn't whether disaster will come. It's whether you'll survive when it does. The Veth built for eternity and almost went extinct when eternity ended. They'll survive now because they've learned to build for change instead of despite it. And if we accept humanity into the council? Another voice asked. If we grant you membership, what then? Will you try to change how we all build? Will you spread your philosophy of impermanence throughout the galaxy? No, Maya said firmly. We'll share our knowledge with anyone who wants it. We'll help anyone who needs it. But we won't force our way of doing things on species that don't want it. That said, we hope you'll learn from what happened to the Veth. We hope you'll start asking yourselves, what happens if disaster strikes our world? Do we have plans? Do we have the knowledge to rebuild? Or have we built something so permanent that we've forgotten how to build it all? The chamber fell into silence. It was an uncomfortable silence, the kind that comes when people are forced to confront truths they'd rather avoid. Velkath stepped forward. The Veth delegation moves to grant humanity full membership in the Galactic Council. They have proven themselves not through conquest or trade or technological advancement, but through their willingness to help others survive. This is the highest quality any civilization can possess. The vote took 3 hours. Every species had to weigh what humanity represented. The end of eternal stability, the acceptance of impermanence, the acknowledgement that everything they had built could someday fall. It was a terrifying thing to accept, but it was also honest. And in the end, truth won. Humanity was accepted into the Galactic Council with 40 votes in favor, 2 against, and 1 abstention. It wasn't unanimous, but it was enough. As Admiral Maya Chun left the chamber, she passed the spot where her mother had stood 17 years earlier. The small carved message was still there. We'll see. Maya smiled and added her own message beneath it. We did. 5 years after humanity joined the Galactic Council, the galaxy looked different. Not in obvious ways. The same species still occupied the same worlds. The same trade routes connected the same civilizations. The council chambers still floated in the void between stars, ancient and unchanged. But something fundamental had shifted in how the galaxy thought about itself. The change started small. A chorus hive city on the northern continent of their homeworld began experiencing structural stress from underground water erosion. In the past, they would have reinforced the existing structures and hoped for the best. Instead, they called human engineers for consultation. Together, they developed a water management system and retrofitted the hive city with drainage channels. The work took 2 years, but when it was complete, the chorus had not just fixed a problem. They had learned how to fix future problems other species noticed. The tall ricks, whose stone monuments had endured for 40,000 years, invited human archaeologists to study their structures. Not to change them, but to understand their vulnerabilities. Together, they identified which monuments were at risk from environmental factors and developed preservation techniques that acknowledged the possibility of decay. It was a philosophical revolution for a species that had believed their monuments would stand until the heat death of the universe. The Namori, who could phase through solid matter and had never worried about structural integrity, began working with humans on something entirely different: disaster response protocols. They realized that their ability to move through walls and debris made them ideal for rescue operations, but they had never developed organized systems for doing so. Human disaster response experts taught them techniques developed over centuries of earthquakes, building collapses, and cave-ins. The Namori formed the galaxy's first dedicated rescue corps. On Earth, Admiral Maya Chun retired from military service and took a position as the director of the Galactic Reconstruction Initiative, a new organization funded by the Council to help species prepare for and respond to catastrophic events. Her first major project was creating a database of every major disaster in recorded galactic history, analyzing what went wrong and what went right. The database became required reading at the new Galactic Engineering Academy, where students from 40 species learned human disaster architecture alongside traditional permanent design. Behind her, the Council continued its session, discussing trade agreements and territorial disputes and all the normal business of galactic civilization. But now they did it in a chamber that had emergency exits, backup power systems, and evacuation protocols. Now, they met in a galaxy that had learned the difference between permanence and resilience. The monuments still stood. The ancient cities still endured. But now they stood on foundations that could survive earthquakes. Now they endured with the knowledge that enduring meant being ready to change. 50 years later, when the next major disaster struck, the galaxy was ready. Not perfectly ready. Never perfectly. But ready enough. Ready to help. Ready to rebuild. Ready to keep going. Because the galaxy had finally learned what humans had always known: the most permanent thing you can build isn't a monument that never falls. It's a civilization that knows how to stand back up when it does. The galaxy learned why humans build after ruin. And in learning, they ensured that when their own ruins came, as ruins always do, they would build again. They would always build again.